Look, the president has secured the border. Border crossings are down 95%. He is deporting tens of thousands of people who have been dangerous, including murderers from New York City. He is also making sure that, look, we've seen mortgage rates come down, inflation has come down, egg prices have come down. These are things you cannot ignore. It's been, he's brought home over or around a dozen hostages, people who were held overseas. And he, within 2 months, was able to get them back. So is there a little concern about the market? Absolutely there is. I think it is a little bit of a over-exaggeration by the market at this moment, and I would equate it to a little turbulence as you move to smooth skies. But you've seen trillions of dollars in investment. You've seen companies saying that they're going to expand operations here. And, of course, a great jobs report the other day, nearly 250,000 new jobs.
So believe it or not, and I know a lot of people are going to struggle to comprehend how this could even be possible, but inflation and consumer prices actually went down in America this week. Now, a lot of people are probably asking, how could that even be? After all, I was told that tariffs raise prices. The media told me that over and over again, right? Tariffs raise prices. They're going to raise inflation. Trump obviously did tariffs this week. So how could it possibly be the case that both prices and inflation are on a decreasing trajectory? Well, we're going to address that in today's video because it turns out a lot of these Facebook PhD self-proclaimed economic experts don't actually know what they're talking about. I know, big surprise to everyone. But that's number one. The second thing I want to address is the crowd of people who may say, wait a minute, how could that be possible? How could things be more prosperous for the everyday American when, after all, we were told that the stock market is down? Right? And that is true. Of course, you keep hearing these statistics. Oh, the stock market is now a bear market. This is the worst sell-off since the COVID pandemic. It's going to be 1929 pretty soon. Blah, 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 blah. And look, to that I say, not to sound like Bernie Sanders or a Democrat from 10 years ago, but this is the honest truth, okay? Number one, President Trump was not elected to enrich Wall Street. He was elected to enrich Main Street, okay? The everyday average American, we ought to be asking, and by the way, the people who really do decide the electorate are the people who are saying my everyday price of goods, not large scale like private equity and all that, right? Trump was not elected to enrich private equity. People might say, oh, but the 401ks. Okay, well, we've addressed that many different times now. But nonetheless, okay, I just want to bring that up. According to Robert Reich, Democrat himself, just a casual reminder here to people, right? The richest people own 0.1%. The richest 0.1% own 17% of all stocks. The richest 1% own 50% of all stocks, and the bottom 50% own 0.7% of all stocks. Repeat after me. The stock market is not the economy, said a prominent Democrat strategist on December 16th, 2020. Well, isn't that ironic? Nonetheless, we're going to tell you all about this here today because this is once again yet another example of why the Democrats don't actually understand how things work. All right, with that said though, guys, do us a favor. If you enjoy the content, make sure you hit that like button down below and subscribe to the channel. If you are new, you subscribing is the best way to support our work and ensure that we can keep doing these videos. Let's continue our push to 1 million subscribers. And with that said, let's just get right into this, okay? You're probably asking, what are we talking about? Well, here's some of the news of this week. We actually already covered this statistic before, but I'll just bring it up once again as a refresher here. As of April 4th, just 2 days ago, oil prices, right? The price of crude oil, which guess what? In the end, in a couple weeks here, you'll see translates to the price of gasoline, is now at its lowest level since 2021. Isn't that interesting? How could that possibly work? Well, I've brought up before, right? I think a lot of Trump policies have direct things to do with this. First of all, as everyone knows, right, he's big on America, drill, baby, drill, right? The increasing of domestic oil production. But I would even say, I don't even think it's necessarily just that. I think it also has to do with the fact that the negotiating to the end of the Russia-Ukraine war, which is far from over, it's getting kind of complicated, but nonetheless, I think even the prospect that that might be coming to an end is encouraging nations like Saudi Arabia to start to lower their price of oil because they understand that there's about to be a lot more global competition soon. But nonetheless, that's the state of the price of oil and gas, which you'll soon see at the pump before people ask. In a couple weeks from now, that will translate to your price of gasoline. But of course, let's also talk about the price of eggs, right? Remember, this was the big Democrat dunk the first month of his presidency. Oh, the price of eggs. Haha, you said you were going to lower the price of eggs, and now you haven't done it. Well, of course, starting in the month of, March, right? These egg prices started to go down, and notice how the Democrats magically stopped talking about it. Well, where are they now? As of March 31st, 2025, so this was about last week, the egg prices went down to a national average, guys, of now $2.98 for a dozen of eggs. Keep in mind, they were at like $6, $7 a dozen in the first month of Trump's presidency. That is the fastest and largest fall that we know of egg prices in U.S. history. Yeah, funny there how Democrats have stopped talking about that. Including, guys, keep in mind this as well, the fact that it's currently the Easter season coming up. Right? Easter is in a couple weeks here. So the demand of eggs is higher, and yet still, okay, egg prices are down way lower than what Donald Trump inherited. Wow. Crazy how that works.
So good thing for egg lovers. Egg prices have definitely turned a corner. President Trump touting that his administration has been able to bring down the cost of eggs, with large egg prices on average down 59% since February 28th. And that's according to USDA data.
Yeah, well, hey, Democrats, what happened? Why did you suddenly stop caring about the price of eggs? Now, all of a sudden, you guys don't care about groceries for everyday Americans. No, it's all just about the stock market, right? Oh, private equity is losing trillions of dollars. This is so concerning. Okay, funny how that all changes. But guys, here is the overall inflation number, as you can see as of today, right? April 6, 2025. According to the Truflation Index, U.S. inflation is now at 1.22%, and look at that trend, right? Since December and January, back when Joe Biden was still president, inflation was all the way up here, peaking at about 3 to 3.1 or so percent. Now, guys, all the way down to 1.22%. There you go. Of course, now let's address the elephant in the room. People are going to look at all of these drops in the prices and say, how could that even be possible? He's doing tariffs. They're supposed to raise prices. They're supposed to raise inflation. How could that possibly work? Well, as it turns out, guys, there's a lot that you people talking about those who are saying, oh, the tariffs are going to raise all the prices in America, don't actually understand about the wider scale reality of economics. But let's first of all just start with this pure statement right here. The effect that tariffs have on consumer prices, while noticeable and while real, is greatly exaggerated, which is something that the first Trump administration as well as the Biden administration both actively recognize. Take a listen for yourself.
Kristen, what I like is data. And if we look at data from President Trump's first term, and there's a big study that just came out from a group of economists, mostly at MIT, that showed that a 20% tariff on China led to a 0.7% tax or price level increase over 4 years. I think that's pretty good. If we can take in 20% in tariffs and it's a 0.7% increase. And Kristen, the little publicized story this week, everyone wants to look at the stock market going down. You know what else went down? Oil prices went down almost 15% in 2 days, which impacts working Americans much more than the stock market does. Interest rates hit their low for the year, so I'm expecting the mortgage applications to pick up.
Well, just to be very clear, though, I mean, during President Trump's first terms, the cost to Americans was nearly $80 billion in new taxes due to his tariffs. The prices did go up on everything from washing machines to tires.
Well, no, but let's go back. The aggregate number was 0.7, so we can discern the individual things. Also, households saw real net wages go up. So if wages go up faster than prices, which is not what happened over the past 4 years, that's why the bottom 50% got eviscerated.
Yeah, well, isn't it funny how that works? And I want to dispel a very important myth right here, because a lot of people seem to be buying into this level of thinking that just totally, but they think they're so smart, right? They think they're like PhD economists here. but just totally ignores the realities of both business and economics, which is basically the thinking that if you have tariffs, the consumer price is going to raise by the same amount. In other words, what these people seem to think is that if the US does, as we'll just use as that example there, a 20% tariff on China, then all of the goods for consumers that are imported from China, all the prices you're going to see on the shelf will go up 20%. And that's, of course, not how it works remotely. As a matter of fact, as Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent pointed out there, in the first term, the 20% tariffs only raised consumer prices on average by 0.7%. And of course, when you consider the fact that Trump is doing policies in other regards, right? If you deregulate the economy, if you raise wages for people, if you do all these other things, you might, even with tariffs, see a net reduction in prices and especially cost of living. But nonetheless, I digress on all of that. Here is the thing about that. Okay, so you're probably asking yourself, how could that be possible? How could you have a 20% tariff, but it only raises prices 0.7%? Guess what? Newsflash, guys. To all these people who are spreading stupid propaganda like this, right? Have you seen these numbers? iPhones being made in the US could cost $30,000, right? You keep hearing this rhetoric. Oh, the tariffs are going to make Nike shoes cost $1,000. iPhones are going to cost, yesterday they were saying $2,000. Now, according to Forbes magazine, they're claiming it's going to cost $30,000 for a new iPhone. Yeah, that's ridiculous. That's just not true. These are made up numbers, okay? And I'm willing to take a bet on that, okay? The iPhone's not going to cost $30,000. Okay, it's a crazy idea. I know that's not going to happen. But why does that not happen? This is important for people to understand. Is because businesses raise prices as a last resort, right? They do not want to raise prices. So in other words, again, when you have a tariff that's 20%, your consumer price is not going to go up 20%. Why does it only go up 0.7%? Well, because it turns out that businesses will, first of all, try to optimize all their business practices in this area to figure out how to eat the cost of the 20% before they raise prices for consumers. Because guess what? You don't want to raise prices because that's going to make the company unpopular. More people are going to choose not to buy that stuff. Okay. And especially, by the way, on a lot of Chinese-made products, like, let's say, the clothes, right? Or you know, actually, let's pick the example of Vietnam, because a lot of people are saying Nike shoes. Okay, in the example of, let's say, Nike shoes. Well, Nike shoes only cost a couple dollars to make, right? They're very cheap shoes. They're cheap plastic that just have a high markup because of the logo next to it, okay? So guess what? If you have tariffs, then if Nike is smart and wants to keep the price the same, they're just going to figure out how to optimize their production first. They're going to try to cut costs in other areas before they raise prices on consumers. And by the way, if they do ultimately resort to raising prices on consumers, it's not going to be the 20%. It's going to be far less than that. Again, why? Because that's not how tariffs work. It's not a one-to-one conversion on what price you're going to see for the consumer. They're number one, okay? So that's the first thing we need to debunk is you're not going to see your iPhones cost $2,000 because of tariffs. That's not how the math works. That's just made up. Again, companies are going to try to optimize their production in other ways and their supply chains first before they raise prices for consumers. So you're not going to see that happen. You might even see prices go up for some imported goods, not going to be at the levels that people are saying. That's number one. But number two here, I think this is also important to understand. People are, of course, saying, how could grocery prices be going down? I thought that, the tariffs are going to raise the prices of groceries. Well, here's the other thing to keep in mind. Tariffs can cause inflation in some areas. Yes, that is true. But you know what they can also cause? Deflation. I don't know why nobody's talking about this, right? No one's considering this. But yes, tariffs can also cause deflation, especially with those groceries that everyone talked about the campaign trail are way too expensive. And why is that? Because guess what, right? Let's talk about the context of like US agriculture. How it might even hurt the factory farms, but for the consumer, it's going to be a very good thing as well. Guess what? Most of the groceries, like the chicken, the beef, the eggs, a lot of the stuff that you're buying in the grocery store is US made, right? It's produced here in America. Okay. But guess what? A lot of our farmers primarily sell stuff to foreign markets, not to here, right? We export a lot of our farm product, for instance, to nations like China. Well, guess what? If you have a trade war, if you're stuck with retaliatory trade policies and all this, and long story short, while that all happens, American factory farms are not able to sell a lot of their product to foreign markets, guess what? They have no other option. They're going to sell it right here in the American market. What is that going to do? Increase the supply of especially things like groceries in the United States of America, which consequently will do what? That will lower prices, right? Supply and demand. You're going to increase the supply here in America because of deflation, because farmers will sit around and they won't have stuff to sell to foreign markets, so they're going to sell them here domestically. Guess what? That's going to lower your prices here in America. Now, I'm not saying that deflation does not have its own consequences, but as I will reiterate, every economic policy has positive and negative consequences. But considering the fact that President Trump promised to do things like lower consumer goods, lower the price of groceries, right? That's what Trump got elected to do. That's what he said he was going to do. Lower the price of groceries, lower interest rates so that people can afford a home. Well, all of the things that Trump is currently doing right now with the trade war have positive consequences in that regard. And again, when we say that tariffs raise prices, that is only considering one side of the story. Turns out there are many other sides to the story, which is, again, companies tried to optimize production, right? And secondly here is that it can also cause deflation. This is a random like 4chan post, but I think it actually very accurately summarizes what is actually going on here. So I'm going to read it for you here today, okay? Here it is, right? And I'm not even saying all of this is true, but this is just a consequence of what you're seeing, which again, kind of puts a nail in the narrative that, oh, all tariffs do is cause inflation and prices to go up. Well, Trump is crashing the stock market at least 20%, yes, causing a flight into treasuries. Because people don't trust the stock market, they want to invest in the treasury instead, right? Because that's more guaranteed. This will cause the Fed to slash interest rates so he can refinance the debt to near 0% and cause a deflationary spiral, which will lower the cost of everything. By the way, if we end up having a recession, which everyone is like, recession, and I actually do think a recession is going to happen, not just because of the tariffs. I think it was inevitable because of the fake economy we've had. The bubble's going to burst. But sure, the tariffs might even accelerate that. That's all true, okay? Recession is a scary word, but what is a recession ultimately? An economic self-correction, right? Something is wrong with the economy and needs to fix itself. That's number one. Number two here, guess what? Your prices and interest rates will actually come down during a recession. So yeah, private equity can sit around and complain, not to be like ironically leftist about this, but it's true. The 1%, right, might not be happy if you have a recession because the value of their assets is deflating. But guess what? For those of you out there who are trying to afford buying a new home or afford the groceries or afford these things, yeah, you're going to get lower interest rates, a deflationary spiral, actually, as a matter of fact. And this has been brought up a lot, but a lot of people are speculating that Trump wants to refinance the national debt, which in the long term, right, if we lower our national debt or the amount we have to pay on it, guess what? Is going to increase the purchasing power here in America that we have. It's going to allow our government to invest in new things, etc. I don't think I have to explain why paying down the debt is such an important thing to do. Now, here's also some things to consider. He also intends to use tariffs as an incentive for companies to build in the U.S. to avoid having to pay them. That is true. Now, the tariffs and resulting global trade war, as I said, as I noted here, would also force American farmers to sell more of their goods in the U.S. due to the retaliatory trade measures by other countries, which will, guess what, directly lower the price of groceries in the U.S. Has anyone mentioned this, right? Again, yeah, tariffs cause inflation. Have we talked about the deflation they can also cause? Which if prices are too high for everyday people, and Trump promised the everyday people of this country, I'm going to lower your prices, hey, he's actually serving his electorate. You know, people are saying Trump is turning his back on the people who voted for him. No. What he's currently doing is meant to help the people who voted for him. Newsflash there. More than 94% of all stocks are owned by just 8% of the US population. Trump is literally taking money from the rich and giving it to the poor. Ironic, because you keep hearing all this rhetoric, right, from the Democrats about the billionaire takeover of America. You know, the billionaire oligarchs, they're taking everything over. Meanwhile, The stock market is crashing stuff for just 8% of the US population, and prices are going down for the other 92%, as well as interest rates. Isn't that so funny? This is why Trump is playing a game of hokey pokey with tariffs. One day he has 25% tariffs on Mexico, the next he doesn't. This causes extreme volatility in the markets and the desperate need and demand to flee towards Treasury bonds, which are much more stable but offer much lower potential return. This is also why eggs are cheaper now than they were under Joe Biden. Isn't it funny how that works? Random post here, but I think it does accurately actually explain everything that is going on. So again, not to be cliche, but while Trump benefits things for the average American, like everyday prices, by the way, people just don't understand how it works. Yeah, that is a result of tariffs in some regard. So anyways, the macro trend here you are seeing, quite ironically, I might add. But while Trump benefits the quality of life of the 99%, the Democrats are going out and saying, no, what about the stock market that is primarily owned by the 1%? As if they won't be fine, as if the stock market won't rebound anyway, right? The market always rebounds. Oh, but my 401k. Okay, to put it into perspective, just to be clear, the huge stock market crash has brought the stock market just down to where, like, the S&P 500 is just down to where it was last year, okay, back in 2024. So 401k is something you invest in over the span of decades, okay? And by the way, it's going to recover, but even if you cash out right now, Trump did not just magically wipe out your entire retirement. That's not how it works. It's a long-term investment. No, the people who are being hit the hardest right now is private equity, is Wall Street, is the day traders, right? But even then, okay, was Trump elected to save them, or was Trump elected to save the working and middle class? Just some food for thought. Anyways, with that said, guys, let me know your thoughts on all of this in the comment section down below. Be sure to leave a like on this video, subscribe if you are new, and until next time, God bless and peace.